Welcome to the InnerVerse. It's an illusion.
Welcome to the One Within All to the InnerVerse podcast. I'm your host, Chance, and it's high time for us to once again refresh our perspective and widen our imaginations to enable us to not only manifest the miraculous, but more importantly, to recognize the magic already embedded in our material and mundane existence. Although I may be preaching to the choir, it seems to me that most people in our world tend to associate magic with fireball-tossing wizards or covert satanic covens, or worse yet, write off the aspiring adept who might open their eyes to the mystical with phrases like magical child thinking, or that's a schizo take. And yet, is there really anything more profoundly beautiful or mystical than the awe with which our children see the new phenomenon in life? Is magic something that we lose in puberty, only attainable through some Doctor Strange pilgrimage to a far-off Carmitage? Or are there simple ways in which we can reframe our experiences that invoke something a little more synchronistic and sublime in ourselves? These are the subjects that our returning guest, Dr. Christopher McIntosh, has dedicated a lifetime to investigating, having published more books on aspects of the occult than I can easily count. And today we have a particularly unique conversation in store for you, as we will be discussing his 2013 novel, Return of the Tetrad. A rather thrilling tale of one man's head-over-heels tumble into the world of powerful occult objects, transcendent magical brotherhoods, and the great game of darkness versus light. To give a bit of the novel's flavor, I'll quote a passage where the narrator recounts his childhood, saying that as a youth, the sensation of well-being had come from the mixture of the unfamiliar with the secure. The child, waking in a holiday bedroom, knows that he carries with him into the unknown future the cocoon of family life, which prevents the unknown from becoming menacing. As we grow older, we enlarge the cocoon with all the habits of an ordered existence, and at the same time long for the unfamiliar. We blame our imprisonment on our wives, families, jobs, even our childhood conditioning, without realizing that the prison lies in our own minds, in our unwillingness to face the dark side of the unknown, instead of merely being titillated by its pleasant aspects. The future that confronted me now was a mixture of light and dark, and I was able to behold it without wishing to draw back. I knew that I could no more remove the shadows than I could remove the passing clouds outside that now and then broke up the sunlight. Yeah, so if you couldn't tell, I absolutely loved this book, and I was thrilled to have the chance to bring Dr. McIntosh back on the show to discuss it. I highly recommend to the listeners that you check out his website, ozgard.net. That's OZGARD.net, linked in the show notes, along with his Amazon author page, where you can peruse his impressive catalog of authorship. We've got a real feast for the imagination on our boards today, and we'd better dive in. So everyone, please extend a warm psychic beam of welcome to our guest, a magical sage who's re-enchanting our materialist age, the great Christopher McIntosh. Welcome back to InnerVerse, and thanks for joining me again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, yeah, I really enjoyed our last one where we talked about your book, Occult Germany. But we went back and forth a little bit about some of the prospects for discussion in this book, and I think we better just dive right in. Starting with, maybe tell us a little bit about the history of this book, Return of the Tetrad, and how it reflects your own spiritual journey.
Well, this book comes out of a particular phase of my life. I really, in terms of my own spiritual journey, I could divide that into 4 phases. The first phase was a Christian phase because that was the tradition that I was brought up in. And then I went through a phase of being very rationalistic and skeptical and basically anti-religion. Then I started to get interested in occult and esoteric things. And I wrote a book on astrology. That was my first book, which came out when I was in my mid-20s. And that led me on to the whole field of the Western esoteric traditions. And so then I went on to write other books. I became interested in the Rosicrucian tradition, and I wrote a popular book on Rosicrucianism, and then a scholarly thesis, which became my doctoral thesis, on a neo-Rosicrucian movement of the 18th century. And then I wrote other books, a book on the French magician Eliphas Lévy, and various other books in the esoteric and occult field. And well, during the course of my researches, I came into contact with a man who had a big influence on me, who was Gerald York, who had been for a while the chief disciple of Aleister Crowley. And he had been very deeply involved with Crowley and Crowley's magic. Then eventually had broken with him for various reasons, broken with him as a disciple, that remained very friendly with Crowley until the end of Crowley's life, and took it upon himself to amass a huge collection of Crowleyana diaries, letters, memento of one kind or another, which he eventually donated to a library in London. And I came into contact with him because I was planning to make a documentary film about Crowley, and got together with a friend of mine who was a TV producer. And we went out to visit Gerald York at his stately home in Gloucestershire. And that was the start of my acquaintance with him. And I visited him several times at his home, and also met with him a number of times in London. And he was a very, very remarkable man. So he is the original, shall we say, the Gilbert North character in the story is loosely based on Gerald York. The narrator is loosely based on myself as a young man, but the events in it are some of the events in it are based on real events, but most of them are fantastic. So the narrator of the story comes into contact with this Gilbert North, who becomes his guru and leads him through a series of extraordinary experiences involving a quest for 4 magical objects which correspond to the 4 suits of the tarot: a wand, a sword, a cup, and a pentacle. So it's a kind of, in a way, a kind of modern Grail quest. And in the course of this quest, all kinds of extraordinary events take place. And it also involves a huge sort of struggle between good and evil, great cosmic struggle between good and evil. And then at a certain point, this whole series of events. I won't say too much because I don't want to give away too much for the reader. But at a certain point, it turns out that events are not what they seem to be. And then there's another twist right at the end. And well, I think that's all I'll say about the plot. But it reflected my own interests at the time. And at the time I wrote it, I was also personally involved in esoteric practices. I was a member of a small group in London that practiced a sort of Golden Dawn type of magic. So I was familiar with magical techniques. So that was the context out of which the book came. And it lay fallow for a very long time. It's been through various revisions. And the first version lay in a drawer for many, many years. And then eventually I got it out again, showed it to various people who thought it was very good and thought I should get it published. And then I knew a publisher in Prague, an esoteric publisher, and he published a Czech version of it. But he was slightly unhappy about the ending and felt that it was somehow incomplete. So then I went back to the original and it greatly expanded it and added a new ending. And then I took it to Mog Morgan, who runs Mandrake Publishers in Oxford, and he published it. So that's the history of the book. Oh, and my friend Lee McCloskey, who's a wonderful artist who lives in Malibu in California, gave me one of his images for the cover. I just hold it up again. It's this wonderful image of the Magus from the Tarot Trumps. And this is very, very suitable because the figure of the Magus is, he's in some of the tarot packs, he's a juggler. So he's both a sage and a kind of trickster and conjurer. And well, that's a motif that is relevant to the story. Yeah, so that's the book in a nutshell.
It's kind of that mercurial essence of the magician that is evident in characters like Crowley, where they're so polarizing. They're either, great or the worst thing that ever happened, depending on who you ask. And it's almost an aspect of the magician that they embrace the role that is needed to balance whatever environment they're in, whether that's bringing good to bad or bringing bad to good, something like that. It's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, it's a kind of chameleon-like quality.
Yeah. Now, I really enjoyed, like, anytime I get to read fiction that contains some kind of teaching element in a way, I find that to be really valuable, that we can learn through allegory more easily than nonfiction or just basic prose. I think that's sort of the drive behind scriptures of the various religions of the world. So, maybe you could talk a little bit more about this occult education genre of fiction and like the value you place on fiction of this sort. And I just want to say, I really enjoyed the book greatly. I'm glad that it was revived after however many decades in a drawer. And I want to encourage people listening that it's a real page turner, very interesting and exciting the whole way through, and easily could be read in the course of a week or less in bite-sized chunks, or I read it pretty quickly myself and was engaged the whole time. So I want to encourage people to check it out if they're curious about these subjects, but would rather have an adventure than, some dry exposition.
Yeah. Well, something else that I should mention. At the time I was began to be involved in all these esoteric things, I became friendly with Lionel Snell, who's also known under his pen name of Ramsey Jukes. And he became a very close friend and remains so today. And he has become his writings have become cult writings in the esoteric world. And the first book that he wrote, I actually had a part in because for various reasons I won't go into in detail, but I prompted him to write it. And it was this book here. It has a curious title. It has the title is this acronym SSOTBME, which I won't explain right now, but I think it's explained in the book. And SSOTBME, an essay on magic. And in this book, he puts forward he puts forward a view of magic as a way, as a perfectly legitimate way of looking upon the world and operating in the world. And he very, very interestingly identifies 4 modalities for operating in the world, namely science, religion, art, and magic. And he connects these with the psychologist Carl Gustav Jung's 4 function of observation, intuition, reason, and feeling. So in his scheme of things, science is observation plus reason. Religion is reason plus intuition. Art is intuition plus feeling. And magic is feeling plus observation. So the thing is that a lot of the time, when we think we're doing science or religion or art, in fact, we're doing magic. And we don't like to call it magic because magic, the word magic has somewhat got into disrepute. But in a way, Lionel has rescued the concept of magic. And other people are also presenting it as a credible and legitimate way of seeing things. So, as I say, very often we're doing magic without realizing it. So, for example, in writing fiction, I am in a way doing something magical because I'm conjuring up a whole world, and I'm conjuring up a series of characters. And if I get it right, and make those characters credible, and make them somehow correspond to universal types of human being, then they enter into the collective mind of the age or the world. And so I create, in a way, a kind of egregore, an egregore being a thought form, a collective thought form on the invisible plane, created by a group of people thinking the same thoughts and focusing on the same symbols and ideas. So this is what the great literature does. the characters in the great works of literature continue to live on in the consciousness, in the collective inherited consciousness. So that's I would say is an example of how we do magic without realizing it.
I'll just say as an example, I once did a visualization type of meditation guided with the intent of meeting a spiritual guide. And who I met was Gandalf. So that's a fictional character, but I experienced it, interfaced with it, communicated with it on my inner plane the way that I would potentially like in a mediumship sense with a deceased real human being.
Yes. So that's an interesting example. Yeah. So the thing is, the way Lionel presents magic in terms of one of these four modalities, these are not in separate compartments. There's always an interaction between them. So sometimes when we're doing science, when we think we're doing science, in fact we're doing magic. As I think I say in the book, there's what you're doing in magic is you are saying to yourself, I'm going to act as if what the world that I'm working in were true. So Lionel gives an interesting example of that in mathematics. He used to be a teacher of mathematics, and he said that in one lesson he wrote up on the board the square root of -1, and the pupils protested and said, "But there's no square root of -1. You can't have a square root of -1." And he said, "Well, wait a minute. Let's just assume that there is a square root of -1. Let's just work as if that square root did exist," and then proceeded to show them that if you assume the existence of a square root of -1, it leads to all sorts of very interesting and useful mathematical procedures. So that would be an example of the use of this as-if principle in mathematics. And, well, the example I gave from literature would be an example of how within the quadrant of art that you can, when you're doing something artistic, you are very often in fact doing something magical. What he has written has really given a new kind of perspective on magic as a legitimate way of proceeding in the world, and a much richer and more interesting way than if you just confined yourself to the scientific mode, for example.
And that's a really good overview and gave me a lot to think about how, science is completely founded on mathematics, but the higher order mathematics become so abstract with things like imaginary numbers and square roots of -1, like you say.
Yeah.
And on top of that, things like everything from astrophysics to biology now highly relies on simulated models that are not really in the world. They're these sort of egregoric constructs that then just build off of each other and sometimes lose touch with the physical reality. What I like though about the concept of magic as you're describing it is this feeling component that also shows up in science. A lot of people's opinion of science is more rooted in what they think feels right rather than what they actually observe. But this, with magic, a lot of the ritual and ceremony of it, or the tools and implements are there to help us with that as if principle by giving us the feeling that we are trying to achieve. We don't often equate consciousness and feeling. We think of consciousness a lot of the time as just what we observe, perceive, or aware of. But by definition, feeling and even emotion is an aspect of consciousness, probably the primary aspect. So when in our lives we want to push the envelope further or create something more profound, we really have to invoke that feeling principle and get out of the dull and numbed, mundane humdrum boredom of a lot of people's daily life and routine. I think that's a really important aspect of magic, is to give yourself ways to create the feeling that you want to achieve. And in terms of art, that's the whole purpose of art for a lot of artists as well, is to transmit a feeling.
Yes, it's also the purpose of a ritual. And often we are taking part in rituals without actually realizing it. I mean, when you think, for example, of attending a play, shall we say a Shakespeare play, shall we say Hamlet? Well, most people wouldn't think of that as a magical ritual, but in fact it is, because when you go into the theater, you sit down and you watch certain things happening on the stage, certain actors appearing dressed in period costumes. And you don't sit there and think, well, these people are just pretending. They're just pretending to be Hamlet and the other characters in Shakespeare's play. And those costumes are just put on to make us think that we're seeing characters from the 17th century or whatever. We don't sit there and think that. We suspend this belief. We immerse ourselves in the play as though it were real. You see what I mean? And in a similar sort of way, an orchestral concert is a kind of ritual, because you go into the concert hall and there's a slight feeling of excitement that builds up as more and more people come in and take their seats. And then the orchestra comes in, and there's sort of interesting, tense moment when they're tuning up their instruments. And then the tuning stops. There's a moment of silence when the conductor comes in, and he goes up onto his podium and raises his baton, which is a kind of magic wand. And then there's the magic moment when he signals to the orchestra to start playing. So that to me is a kind of magical ritual, although most people wouldn't call it that. But in all these ways, magic is sort of woven into life.
And then there's a lot of elements about that symphonic experience that are, in a magical sense, despite there being a repetition of the ritual of it. They're reading from certain sheet music. They're performing in the same concert hall, doing it all, attempting to do it all the same way. There's this magic of the moment and of the composition of witnesses that makes it differ from time to time.
Yes.
I think it's, I don't remember the name of the performer, but I've heard of this performance from a client of mine who described it. It was called 433. And the performer comes out to his piano. He opens the piano lid, sits there for a moment, waits, and then he closes it. And that's the first movement. And then he does the whole thing again 3 times. But every time he does it, there's a different feeling, because there's the odd person coughing or sneezing in the crowd. There's the feeling in the air. There's so many, there's the opinion of people's psychic energy that's projecting onto this performance. And I think that's a particularly interesting magical experiment, how our witness affects the outcome of things. And that's something for society to, at this phase, to really learn that the way that they're practicing this as if principle that is so magical without even necessarily knowing it, especially in the negative assumptions they have about themselves or life, and in the acting as if these limiting beliefs are true, they are, they're holding the posture that invites those things to come to pass, or that makes them behave in the way that self-fulfills the prophecy.
Yeah.
I think we should get into, I think one of the most important questions that one can talk about with magic to remove the boogeyman from it potentially, which is always my goal, is to take away people's sense of being victimized, is the way that black magic in the collective imagination is totally merged with just the idea of magic. And I wanted to read this really fascinating quote that you have the character North say in the novel, who's based on York, that you said was the inspiration. And North says, "Black magic is a term used by simpletons for things they are afraid of or don't understand, or both. To talk about black magic is like talking about black electricity. Magic is like any other force. It can be used for good or evil purposes, but it differs from other forces in that when it is used for evil, that evil always in the end rebounds on the person who is so using it. This means that anyone who consciously practices so-called black magic is either a foolish dilettante, and there are quite a few of those, or someone so committed to evil that he is willing to sacrifice himself to the powers of darkness. In other words, a veritable saint of evil. And of these, there are very few. The true saint of evil must perform miracles of darkness, as the saint of good must perform miracles of light." So my question in all that would have to be, does the inspiration for North's explanation come from personal experience or your research on the occult, or is this entire notion part of the theatrics of magic that are necessary to generate a certain effect?
Well, it's really part of the theatrics of the narrative, actually, because North builds up in the mind of the narrator this enormous struggle between good and evil. And so when he talks about saints of evil and so on, it's really more driven by the narrative than that I actually believe in such things. But I would say that, well, I would basically agree that magic itself is neither good nor evil. It's just a force. It's a method, a tool. But it can be used for evil purposes. And well, the thing is that magic, that sort of the really serious form of magic, the way that it works is because at the deepest level of ourselves, we're connected to the whole universe, and the universe is, everything in the universe is connected by invisible fields, and one sort of all-encompassing field. This is what the French magician Eliphas Lévy called the astral light, which was then borrowed by the theosophists, who also used the term. And this astral light, this universal fluid or universal field, can be manipulated by people who have the right techniques. And there are I've used the word egregore, meaning as I said, a collective thought form. And there are these egregores in the astral light, in this universal field. And some of them are not very pleasant. We say some of them are directly evil, and it's possible to plug into those. That's why magic can be dangerous. And if you were to plug it into an egregore with evil intent, then it would in the end rebound back on you. So that's basically what I would say on this question.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. That there's like the universal life force energy is how I like to describe it. That which animates all the bodies and matter and connects everything and is primary to existence. So it's before the concepts of space and time. I think of the universal life force as being 100% complete and whole with no ability to be divided. So the life force in any one being is intrinsically not just connected to, but the same as the life force in other people. And that's, maybe why the word soul also resonates with the word soul, like solo, like alone. And that being said, I like how in the theatrics of the book, when these evil forces or egregores of darkness are sent towards the protagonists, that their method to combat them isn't really about directly fighting, but about maintaining their own personal balance, and that is the real defense. And so in a society where there's a lot of association with magic and the occult, with the idea of evil sorcerers that steer society, do you think that such things are in play with human civilization? And do you think they're a real threat to the truly balanced individual?
You mean the negative egregores?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of talk online and in circles that I'm interested in and in paranormal and occult studies that say that there's, black lodges that are secretly manipulating world governments and doing this and that. And to me, it's like just a game of Russian dolls of, the banker is controlled by the demon, is controlled by the alien, is controlled by Cthulhu. And it's just like a never ending chain of who somebody outside yourself to blame. And at the top would be like the demiurge idea or something. And I don't resonate with that. I resonate more with personal responsibility. But that being said, I wonder, I'm not ruling out that there could be people in positions of power that attempt to use these type of practices and knowledge for the steering of the ship of state, if you will. So I wondered what your thoughts are on that and how the individual might face up to such realities if they exist in their own personal life.
Well, I think that there are a few, rather crackpot sort of people who are practicing what they would call black magic. But I think I think there are negative forces at work in this etheric realm and in these egregores, which somehow they somehow batten onto certain people and certain movements, which are not necessarily overtly magical or esoteric, but they have a force. Nevertheless, they can cause people to act in a particular way, to move in a particular direction,
especially in collectivized ways. Like communism, I think, is an example of this nebulous, in almost possessed influence upon the collectivized mindset of people that are professing it.
Yes, and there's a very interesting book about that, which has recently come out by Stephen Flowers, called the occult roots of Bolshevism, and he deals very very interestingly with this very phenomenon, and shows how there are certain kind of occult forces behind Bolshevism. One doesn't think of Bolshevism being in any way occult, but he shows that it does have certain occult and esoteric roots.
Oh, yeah. So that sounds really interesting. I'm going to check out that book for sure. And we'll just say we can, my conclusion on these things is there's something at play with the dynamic between the collectivism versus individualism. And when there's imbalance towards the collectivism, that represents, in a yin and yang sense, a more dark turn, because the yin force being that which is like the field that things operate in, like the black background that the points of yang white light sit upon. And it's not that the darkness is itself evil, but really the question comes back to balance, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But since we are talking about egregoric entities and interplane beings that have potential bad intentions, there's this character in the book that a ritual is done with the goal of replacing her personality with another entity. Is that something that comes from accounts that you're aware of, that, the full possession or overriding of a person with one of these other consciousnesses can happen, or is do you consider that in the realm of possibility?
Oh yeah, I think it's in the realm of possibility. I don't know if you're familiar with Dolores Ashcroft-Nowitzki. She founded a thing called the Society, the Servants of the Light, a kind of magical order, sort of along the same lines as the Society of the Inner Light, founded by Diane Fortune. Anyway, there's an interesting book by Herbie Brennan called Whisperers, which is about the influence of, basically the influence of spirits and spirit entities in history. And he relates an interesting story about Dolores Ashcroft-Nowitzki and her teacher, who was Ernest Butler. And Ernest Butler had an entity which I think had, if I remember it rightly, this entity had been an Egyptian priest, and he was a kind of host to this entity. It was a benevolent entity, and he willingly took it on, so that he was in a way carrying the spirit of this priest. And then at a certain point, when he was getting old and realized he didn't have much more time to live, this entity was transferred to Dolores Ashcroft-Nowitzki. So that's an example of what you're talking about.
Man, yeah, that's such a crazy topic. I think that the declassified efforts of world governments, or particularly the MK Ultra experiments in the United States, are also an example of like an attempt to systematize that possibility for the creation of programmable Manchurian candidate assassin spies, which it gets freaky. I still like to think that there's a free will component that is necessary, or that even if the magic isn't quite so ritualistic and it's more mundane in the way that the darkness is inflicted upon a potential victim, that still it still invokes the lashback effect on the practicer. And I don't think that it can be sustained. You know, and then that begs the question of like, are there ways to circumvent that particular element of natural law through the manufacture of consent? And a lot of the harm that is done as civilization's basic modes of operation trudge on in our modern world do seem to revolve around the manufacture of people's consent through various forms of media that just sort of put it in people's mind as like, that's the way it is, right? And you're not doing anything about it. But I want to ask you about, you know, there's some particularly interesting dialogue about the devil in this book. And there's a question that Paul, the main character, asks his mentor, Gilbert. And I wanted to ask you this question. Do you believe in the devil as an individual?
I think the short answer is no. But the figure of the devil is interesting, because in Christianity, the devil is the great villain. He's the great scapegoat. The devil is pure evil. I don't think I believe in the devil in that sense. In the pagan tradition, in particular in the Nordic tradition, there is a sort of devil figure called Loki. He comes in some of the films about the Nordic mythology, and
one of my
Loki,
favorites.
He's your favorite, is he?
Oh, yes. I think he's the most interesting Mercury figure out there.
Yeah, in a way he is. Well, he's there's a quotation in Goethe's Faust, which I think applies to him, where Mephistopheles appears and Faust asks him who he is, and he says, I'm a part of that power which always wills the bad and always does the good, or always causes the good. So he's in a way like the grain of sand in the oyster, you know, which is an irritant, which in the end produces a pearl. And Loki in the Nordic tradition is a bit like that. Although he is the things he does can be extremely unpleasant. He can cause death and destruction, you know. So he's not he's a figure that one has to be very careful with. But he does sometimes come to the rescue when the gods are in trouble. He comes to the rescue and rescues them through his cunning. So this figure of Loki is, to me, I think it's useful to have a figure like that in your mythology, because it can be the case that when something apparently very evil or very bad happens, that in the long run it leads to a good result.
I think always.
You think always?
Yes, I think that always, with the right amount of perspective, a wide enough lens, or a long enough timeline, that all seeming evil or bad ends up serving good and growth inevitably.
Yes. Yeah.
And then that's why I don't like the way that a lot of church interpretation of the devil concept uses it simply as a scapegoat and as like a personality to blame for their own succumbing to temptations that imbalance them. But back to Loki, I love to play around with philology, that particularly the fact that the third letter in many alphabets is C, but in older alphabets it's G, and that sound of G and C have obvious similarity in how people pronounce them. And then Loki could be Logi, or like a logos figure, that he's, like all Mercury figures, bringing good where there's bad and bringing bad where there's good, as a force that actually ultimately works for balance and harmony, even if that means having to take on the role of the villain sometimes, or other times getting to be the hero. I think Jesus is the same figure. That's why he's referred to in the Bible as the morning star, just like Satan or Lucifer. That's the same figure. It's the one that brings balance. Sometimes he brings the sword, sometimes he brings the miraculous healing. And I think, a quote from the book is that the conventional devil is symbolic of a real principle that exists in the universe, the principle of imbalance leading to disintegration. And I think that's a super profound and succinct way to conceive of the devil as a principle, that whenever there's imbalance that is perpetuated for too long, what it is that's imbalanced will eventually cease to exist because of the imbalance. And in the same way, we can even conceive of the satanic idea as the ceasing to exist concept, because Satan is meant to be the adversary or opposer to Jehovah or Yahweh. And that word, the tetragrammaton, Yad He Vav He, it's phonetically very similar to just the He Vav He, which is the name of Eve. And that means life, and it means existence. If you were to just write it out transliterated, you could say Yad He Vav He as Yeve or you, just like you would say, it's the same pronunciation as Eve. And I think they're the same figure. Honestly, I think it's the great mother father androgyne that just got a bit confused in later iterations of the system that we call Christianity. And because Yad He Vav He, or Eve, means life and existence, then that which is the opposite or adversarial to it would be non-existence. And it's profound to me, because you have this character, the Lord of the Klipoth, who is the arch villain of the story. And throughout the story, whether or not he even exists becomes a concept. Like, he's a very nebulous figure. Maybe he exists, maybe he doesn't. And I think that's a perfect devil representation. And also that, we should just conceive of, rather than getting hung up on good and evil and who to make the scapegoat, to just realize that the purpose of life is to continue living and to continue existing, and that requires balance, because imbalance is what leads to non-existence. And in the same rationale, Satan as a figure, meaning, in my opinion, through the language, non-existence, and we can just assert that figure does not exist, or at the very least wrap up the principle of evil within the context of how the God, or like the savior or the Mercury figure, operates on the world. Like, rather than conceiving of God as being purely good, you conceive of God as being the author of all things. And I think that's a more balanced approach and more rational approach.
Yeah. And one of the things that helps to keep us balanced is the quality of humor. And Loki has that. He sometimes makes fun of the gods, and I think this is very healthy. You see, he doesn't treat the gods with enormous humility and reverence. In fact, there's a scene in one of the sagas where the gods are having a banquet, and he comes in and he insults them all in a very, very sort of witty way, and truly takes them down and satirizes them. And so I think that's a healthy thing. I think we need these figures who make fun of authority and deflate authority through wit and humor. This is why dictatorships don't like humor, because it can deflate authority.
And because for things to be really funny, they have to be rooted in truth, which means the real jester is the profound truth teller. and who's skilled enough to do it in a way that can bring levity to what is otherwise a painful truth. I can't remember if it's Old Welsh or Gaelic, but it's one of those ancient languages of the Isle that the word pain, as we actually means truth in one of those languages. You know,
really?
Like I find that right. It's kind of like a mystical, the truth hurts thing. And that's why that humor is so important. And I like that, in regards to the devil being symbolic of imbalance in the extremes, the magician being the one that brings balance. You talk about magic as the laughing, joyful, moving balance of the dancer. Yeah. And I love that, because by the end of the story, that feeling of humor comes through in a profound way, and you get the sense of a sort of cosmic running joke, which I believe all of the most profound synchronicities I've ever experienced felt like the kind of elbow in the ribs, wink, wink, nudge, nudge of, are you getting it? Like, this is hilarious, right?
Yeah. Yes. That happens sometimes when strange coincidences happen, which seem almost like a joke on the part of the cosmos. I've had those sort of things happen to me. Like a few months ago, I was sitting at my computer in our living room, and my wife was watching television in another part of the room, and I was looking for a motif, because I one of the things I do is I create sculptures and works of art for our garden, and I was looking for a motif, and I was browsing in the internet, and I came up with the image of an owl. And at that same moment, my wife was watching a quiz show on television, and one of the contestants, a woman, was asked what her favorite animal was. And at that precise moment, she said, an owl. So I thought that was a perfect example of, in a way, the universe making a pun through a coincidence.
If you're paying close enough attention, these things happen not as the exception, but more as the rule, in my opinion.
They do, yeah.
And I think that that's where there's a misunderstanding about like Jungian concept of synchronicity, that symbolic literacy is important so that you're in on the joke more often. Personally, because if you can't see the multidimensional nature of the words and symbols in your environment and in your thoughts, then you may miss out on some of the less obvious examples of the cosmic giggle, right? Yeah, but I know what you mean. Like, I just was listening to a podcast this morning at the gym while on the treadmill, and I looked down at my phone because an email had popped up, and in the email had subject line had the word sweet. And right as I read, my eyes passed over the word sweet, the person talking on the podcast said sweet. And I was like, oh, sweet. That happens all the time.
Yeah. That's also a good example. Yeah.
So it's about learning to be more attentive, I think, which is another aspect of magic, is the training of one's attention. But while we're in this first hour, I wanted to ask you, because this, I think, expands on what we've just been discussing, if there's more to say about the central message of the book in regards to how one can learn to see reality differently, because I think that was such a profound theme that comes out by the end.
Yeah, well, this is really the central message of the book, and it's conveyed to the narrator during a conversation that he has with Gilbert North in a park in London. And I think I can find the passage actually. Yes, North says, "You say you believed yourself to have witnessed miracles. In fact, what happened was that you looked for the miraculous and found reality. Now you must look at reality and find the miraculous." And then he points to a rose and he says, "Look at that rose. Is it any less miraculous than a talisman that can conjure up forces from the inner planes?" So that's essentially the message of the book. That to realize that everything around us is miraculous, really, and so and also that we should never take the view. We should never say that something is nothing but. Something is nothing but a fantasy, nothing but an illusion, or that the moon is nothing but an inert chunk of rock in space. There's nothing but attitude. This reductionist attitude. That's something that we should avoid.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really profound passage. And so applicable. And, to circle back around to what I was trying to invoke in the introduction, that the childlike magical thinking that is sort of frowned upon by all of the grown-ups. That with magic being so reliant on or involved with invoking feeling in the practitioner, that final message of learning to see the miraculous in everything is a way that you can consistently root yourself in the feeling of life without having to go out of your way to do any kind of esoteric ceremony or ritual, that you realize that everything is incredible. I mean, I've got, a chunk of crystal here on my desk. Like, this exists. This came out of the ground. Every time I look at this, I can go, wow, look at that. And I can feel something. And the more that you can create that feeling of wow, the more enthusiasm comes into your daily life experience. And I think that word is so indicative of the true divinity in man, that entheos, enthusiasm, the God is dwelling within, that the more we have that sense of wonder and awe and appreciation for our experience here, I think the more divine power, synchronicity, and cosmic jokes are funneled into our life experience. That's the real magic, is staying in the wow.
Yes, that's
like
right.
that, and that's what makes life worth living. That's what takes someone out of suicidal depression and puts them into, unquestionable success. And it doesn't matter your circumstances. If you feel the wow all the time, you're succeeding. You're succeeding regardless of where you are, what you're doing.
Well, I think children are actually born with that, but they unlearn it over time as they grow up. And part of the task is to regain that childhood's sense of wonder.
While I've got you, maybe if I can ask just one final question. The book references keeping a magical diary.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could speak about that, or if there's any other things that people could kind of take home with them as a magical practice, do it yourself, to, invoke the power of the feeling altering, consciousness altering capacity that the magic has for us.
Yeah, well, I once, a long time ago, did a kind of magical retreat. I went and I spent a few days at a cottage in the country near Edinburgh, which was owned by my parents, and spent a few days there doing a kind of magical retreat. And I kept a diary during that period. And it's a valuable thing to do, to record one's experiences, the kinds of insights that one has, the sort of coincidences or whatever that happened during the retreat. So I actually before this conversation, I tried to find the diary. I couldn't actually find it. I was hoping to get it out and quote from it. But it's a very good thing to do as part of a process of spiritual development. And my friend Lionel Snell did a magical working called the Abramelin working, which also involved keeping a diary, and he wrote an account of this, which is extremely interesting. So yeah, I can recommend it to anybody who is planning embarking on such a retreat.
Yeah, if we're taking note of our synchronicities and also our epiphanies, that invites them to occur with more regularity. So I can see the very practical value as a magical practice that, to at least create a container or a vessel for these thoughts that have the feeling of being magical thoughts. Because otherwise, like any other thought, it just evaporates into the ether and may never be seen again, or someone else might grab it. Well, I've really greatly enjoyed this conversation, Christopher. It's a real pleasure and honor to be able to talk about your excellent novel. And I appreciate you being interested in coming back on. And I think we had an even better time this one than the last one, which was great too. So if there's any closing thoughts you want to leave people with as we're wrapping up, the floor is yours. But once again, my gratitude to you, sir.
Well, it's been a great pleasure for me as well. And thank you for inviting me. And I hope that listeners will read the novel. It's, if I can just give a little plug for it, it's published by Mandrake of Oxford, and it's easily obtainable through Amazon or other outlets.
Yes, I loved it myself, and it's gonna remain in, a place of honor on my bookshelf. And invite people to read it that might be hanging around. But yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much, and we'll wrap it up here. And you take care.
You too.
Hey, fellow questers of the magical. I really appreciate you guys being here for this conversation. I think it's a special one. It's unique. Probably not a lot of podcasts out there in the world where you're going to hear the great Dr. McIntosh speaking about his novels. He's made the rounds on some popular shows discussing other books that he's written in the nonfiction, but this book, The Return of the Tetrad, there's a heart to it that you can't really invoke in a nonfiction type of more academic overview and things. And when he offered it as a potential, he gave me a list of a few of his books that he'd like to talk about, and he was keen to talk about his fiction. And I see why, because you really pour your heart and soul into fiction more than the average thing. This one in particular, because so much of the book is based on his own experiences back in the day. And I love that. And he even, off air, he talked about how he never thought this book would be published because he wrote it more as his own meditation and trying to work out certain notions and using the vehicle of the narrative to help himself understand things about like the mechanics of magic and life and reality. And I think that that's so cool. So I'll, if you want a little more taste of what the book's about, I'll read you the back jacket, if you will. This is actually just the description on the Amazon cover page, but it says, Paul Cairns, the narrator of this story, is a young journalist with a penchant for the occult. Prompted by a mysterious recurring nightmare, he seeks the advice of Gilbert North, scholar, country squire, and occultist, who leads him on an extraordinary series of adventures involving a quest for the Tetrad, four primal magical objects corresponding to the elements and the suits of the tarot. Karen's life becomes full of weird and supernatural happenings and a great battle between light and dark. But in the world of Gilbert North, things are not quite what they seem. Layers of reality and unreality are peeled away until the deeper meaning of the whole quest is revealed. So if that's not a good teaser, just do yourself a favor and enjoy an easy read, a great novel, something that's got all the flavors that you probably like if you're an InnerVerse fan. Ultimately, I just want him to see a nice bump in sales of the book off of this conversation. If you do read it, also go to the Amazon author page and leave a review of it. That is so important and so helpful to authors in the modern, technoscape of how people find things to read. I just really like and respect Dr. McIntosh, and I hope you guys enjoyed this talk as much as I do, and pay it forward, show some love, pick up this cool novel. Maybe it's a gift for somebody in your life that is interested in magic. So if you guys only caught the first hour and you're curious about part 2, I'll go through a little bit of what's in the second half. There's how the return of the Tetrad. Wait, that's the free part. Sorry. In part 2, we talk about the roles of the sexes with magical work and the process of occult initiations with the 4 elements, the Brotherhood of Light, and the transcendental awareness that initiates seem to have, especially of one another, the great game of the Rosicrucians, the talismans and magical objects that show up in the story, fate, free will, and a strange device called the Prognometer, the significance and history of the hairy wild man in Europe, magical research in the pre-internet era. That's a fun one. Going to libraries. And then finally, we talk about the golem and the manifestation of the uncontrollable unconscious forces. So that's just a little taste of what's in the second part. You know the drill. Patreon or Rockfin or the YouTube membership is how you access that second half. I do hope you enjoy that for subscribers and members. I'm sure you did. I wanted to give another quote from the book that I thought was really profound, where he says, and he talked about this a bit at the end of the free hour. He says, or a character says, there's a fashion today for what one might call the reductionist philosophy. Matter is nothing but a collection of atoms moving according to certain fundamental laws. Life is nothing but a complex chemical process. Love is nothing but an illusion based on conditioning and physical need. Those who preach nothing but philosophy imagine that they are being objective. In fact, they are being subjective in a negative way. Total objectivity is impossible for anyone. Everyone, even the purest scientist working in the utmost isolation, has to decide in the depths of his being whether he is going to say yes or no to the universe, or else postpone the decision, which is another way of saying no. At the moment, it is the no's who rule the world. It is up to the yeses to try and keep a sense of the miraculous alive. So, that's just a beautiful sentiment. Say yes to the universe. I'm all about that. All about if magic is all just a recognition of the great play and the game of life and having fun with it, rather than being all stuck in the fear that restricts the potential of the fun and the wonder, then considering the rules of improv, that it's about yes and wherever possible. There's some things you got to say no to, but generally, if you're in the flow of ecstatic, enthusiastic, perpetual synchronicity, it's just a big game of saying yes to things, and you don't have to say no to things so much as you just don't say yes to them that are not for you. I hope that makes sense. I might be rambling a bit, but I loved this. And in a way, I've always been interested in these things. That whole concept of possession by egregoric or evil entities from the inner plane is kind of funny, because recently I've rediscovered my favorite book series as a kid, which I read so much and like over and over read these books. If you're my age, you've heard of them. They're called Animorphs. And they're about kids who get the power to transform into animals to fight an invasion of evil brain slug aliens that are controlling people's minds covertly and taking over the entire human race. And, it seems it's got a lot of the sci-fi element to it, but really on a deeper level, it's a super spiritual story that just uses the science fiction as a vehicle to talk about much more profound things. And it's almost shamanistic in a way, especially how the characters have to become the animal and they tune into the consciousness of the animal and that remains a part of them. They're having dreams about being a tiger or dreams about being an ant. It's really cool. There's recently been an adaptation to graphic novel form of the first 4 of those books. And that's what got me intrigued in them again. And man, they're cool. So in a sense, these type of occult fiction or magical educational novels have always been something I've loved and had a deep fascination with. And this has just been an excellent conversation. I'm hoping you guys out there enjoyed it as much as I did, and do show Christopher McIntosh some favor by picking up, if not this book, one of his other ones. But why not this book? I can tell it has a real special place in his heart. And how could it not? The nostalgia of that time in your life when you're rediscovering the magic that might have gotten lost after childhood. There's nothing like it. So with that, I'm going to tune out of here, but don't forget, there's lots of ways to support the show besides becoming a Plus member for the extended content. Although I think that's the best way to do it. You could additionally get Tippecanoe Herbs. Go to their website, find the link in the show notes. The bottom of the description is always going to have all the ways you can support the podcast, but Tippecanoe Herbs is my favorite. I'm a bit overdue to order some more stuff from them myself. I find like last night was a Wednesday, and so I had a Vibrant, and by the end of that, it's 9 or 9:30, and I'm pretty wired from the bright lights and the screen and the flow state of the conversation. And it's at those moments that I turn to a little tincture that Kyle calls ZZZ, which I'm not sure what else in it, but it takes some of that, just a dropper's full, and start reading a book. And within a half hour, I'm ready to go to sleep. It is highly effective. And there's many other, usually I'm pimping the Kapow tincture for getting up, but sometimes you got to get down, got to get up to get down, got to get down to get up. So I really like those two, the Kapow energy tincture and the Zzz rest enhancing tincture. But there's all kinds of good stuff on there. Use the coupon code InnerVerse when you check out for the discount. Many other ways to support the show, though. Go investigate the links in the show description, or get a biofield tuning with yours truly. Those are filling up as they always do. We're getting into mid-June in terms of booking opportunities at this point. So don't sleep on that. If it's something you want to do sooner than later, InnerVersePodcast.com/sound-healing, or just shoot me an email, chance@InnerVersePodcast.com. And, once again, don't forget, if you do pick up this book, go leave a review on Amazon for Dr. McIntosh. And I'm speaking to myself here because I forget this myself, but generally speaking, if you read a book these days and you liked it, leave that author a good review on their Amazon page. It's a drop in the bucket, but each drop has a monumental effect of helping more people access the work. It's actually quite important. And heck, if you're listening to this show through the iTunes podcast app and you've never left a review for this show, the same applies. Maybe go leave me a positive review on the iTunes podcast app. Sure doesn't hurt. I haven't asked for that for a long time, and haven't seen any new ones come through for a long time. So now I'm asking. Pretty please. I think that there's nothing quite like this channel out there. I'm proud of it. I love it. I love what I'm doing. I love my job. It's amazing that I get to do this for a living, and that's thanks to you guys. So my love to you as well. And hope you guys be good out there and enjoy your, the beginnings of May. See, by the time this comes out, it's going to be May 6th. So, we'll already be through it, but hopefully May the 4th be with you and all that this weekend, or was last weekend at this point. But all right, I'm out of here. Much love. Peace.